Okay, hello everybody. We're going to get started. Thanks for sticking it out to the bitter end on Friday morning and joining us today. Welcome to Manage and Protect O365 mobile apps with Microsoft Intune. I'm Joey Glock. I'm joined up here by my colleague Pragathi.
Hey.
We're both program managers on Intune. Specifically, we work in sort of the MAM or app management and conditional access space. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of level set on where this talk will hone in and focus. So as you've probably heard throughout the week, if you guys have been attending any of the Intune talks, there are different layers of management that Intune provides, right? So we have user management through identity and conditional access controls. There's been sessions on that. There's app management that we're going to talk about today. Across the Enterprise Mobility Suite, you're looking at data management through Azure Information Protection, or RMS. And then, of course, Intune's bread and butter traditionally has been mobile device management, full lockdown management of the device. So that kind of creates this enormous ecosystem where you're protecting services in the cloud with conditional access. You're protecting user identity with Azure Active Directory. You're protecting data with AIP, like I mentioned at the top. And we kind of think of this traditionally from Intune's sense as the device management lifecycle. So you provision a device, the device enrolls into Intune, you protect the device and the user on the device by limiting its access to corporate resources until the device is compliant, you retire the device, and so on. Well, in Intune, when we think about apps, we think about the same lifecycle, and that's going to be the structure of our talk today. So Intune apps have their own lifecycle, like I said. So basically, you come in, you can add an app to the Intune ecosystem. And we say apps, we mean iOS, Android, Mac apps, Windows apps, both traditional desktop MSI type of apps, as well as modern store apps. Add an app to the Intune ecosystem. You can deploy that app, provision it out, distribute it to your users. You can configure that app. So configuring is setting the app up so that it's ready to roll as soon as the user opens it for the first time. Where we'll spend probably most of the talk is talking about protecting apps. So this, if anybody is familiar, we have our MAM controls for iOS and Android, and we have new MAM controls with Windows 10 called Windows Information Protection, and I'm going to talk about that today. And then finally, you can retire an app. So as you can see, apps kind of have the similar device or similar app lifecycle than that devices do. So we're going to walk through that life cycle step by step. We're going to talk about how you get apps into the Intune ecosystem, how you can distribute them, how you can configure and provision them, show you how to protect them and how to retire them. Every step of the way, we're going to show you some of the new features that have come out that you may not be aware of, and show you some demos about those features. And the thing that I want to call out is that this app lifecycle is applicable both for devices that are enrolled into Intune MDM, as well as devices that aren't enrolled at all. So we have the Intune SDK, that some of you might be familiar with. It's what has applied our MAM technology for the better part of the last couple of years, and I'll talk about what the SDK is. But that SDK allows us to manage apps based on identity and of the app itself. So independent of how the app is distributed via an MDM channel, on a user's BYOD device, we can force data into a set of trusted applications, and then we can protect those apps on the device. So I'll talk about every step of the way, every piece of this lifecycle. We'll talk about the flavors of protection that we have between an MDM-enrolled device and what we can offer, as well as a non-enrolled or enrolled to a third-party MDM, like MobileIron or AirWatch, what protections we can offer at that plane. So to start, I'm going to pass it off to Pragathi, and she'll tell you how we add apps to Intune.
For add apps, Intune currently supports all the major platforms when it comes to adding an app to your Intune management ecosystem. And this includes iOS, Android, and Windows. And this is pretty much identical across both of your MDM-enrolled, corp-owned device sets, as well as your non-enrolled BYOD device. So here, across these three platforms, we support the store apps across each of these respective stores. We also support line of business apps across each of these three platforms. For Windows specifically, we'll be supporting AppX, Zap, and MSI file types. And if your organization has any volume purchased apps, you can also sync them in using iOS VPP or Windows Store for Business. One of the new features that's come up in the last couple months has been the Office 365 Pro Plus suite. So now you can actually add this to your Intune app ecosystem as well and configure and deploy it as a clean installed app. On top of all of these platform-specific apps, we also support the deployment and management of web apps. So with that, I'd like to go into a demo on how you could add apps on the Intune admin console. So here you'll see that I have my Intune admin console open. This is the landing page. And to access any of the features associated with the app management lifecycle, you'll have to navigate to the app's workload here and go under apps. This is your managed apps list. This is where you come to add your apps, deploy them, monitor them. Everything happens in this blade over here. You can go ahead and click Add. For this example specifically, I'm going to go ahead and show you how adding a line of business app would work. I will also then be showing you how to add an iOS store app in parallel. So we'll go here, and under app type, you'll notice all the app types that we just discussed, the store apps, line of business, web app, and the Office 365 Pro Plus suite. I'll go ahead and select line of business here. And under app package file, today I have an Android line of business app that I'd like to add to my app lifecycle, so I'll go ahead and select that. And you'll see that the metadata fills out underneath just to give you an idea in case you need to do any app validation. So go ahead and click OK. All that's left at this wizard at this point is just filling out a description, editing the name, and entering a publisher. I'll just go ahead and put in my name here. And of course, these are all editable at a later point as well, so you don't have to fully fill this out apart from the required fields. And you can select a logo if you want. Today, I don't have one, so we're good to go there. Go ahead and click Add. And because this is a line of business app, this is going to go ahead and get the upload started. So as you can see, it says the application is created, but it's not yet ready because the upload is still in progress. So while that's going on, let's go ahead and also add an iOS store app in parallel. So go ahead and click Add again. And under here, we'll select the iOS store app. And you'll notice that we just got a notification, actually, that our upload completed in parallel. So here, this is really cool, actually. Under the iOS store app, we actually directly go to the iOS store to fetch apps. So you can search for the app that you want to add to your environment and manage. In this case, I'll go with Microsoft Teams. And as you can see, it shows up directly here. I don't have to go navigating between the two sites. And because we're pulling it straight from the iOS store, we actually get the app information extracted as well. So we do some of this work for you, and you don't have to fill this out manually. Of course, you can always go in and edit it at any point. We also pull in the logo here. Go ahead and click OK. Add that. And now this app has now been added to your environment. And you'll notice that as soon as the app gets added, you'll have a notification up top that actually pushes you to take that next step in the app lifecycle, which is assignment or deployment. So I'll go ahead and switch back to my slide because I think this takes us to the next step in the app lifecycle. Sorry. I was going to show you screenshots, but I decided to do a demo instead. So for assign apps, this is the obvious next step. Here, for MDM enrolled and corp-owned devices, we support 4 types of assignment: available, required, uninstall, and not applicable. So when you assign an app as available to your users, what it does is the users can go to the company portal and see that app listed there. If you'll recall, we filled out a bunch of information for that app. All of that information shows up to the user, like the name, the description, publisher, and so on. You can also, when you assign an app as required, it automatically installs that app on the user's device. When you assign an app as uninstall, it does the exact opposite. It force uninstalls the app from the user's device. And when you assign it as not applicable, it basically excludes that user or set of devices from seeing that app in the company portal. So just want to caveat here that not applicable only excludes from the available assignment type. If you have assigned an app as required as well as not applicable, the required will always take precedence over that. Now, there are 2 new features we'd like to announce for the assignment stage, and one of them is available with or without enrollment. And this is specifically for BYOD non-enrolled devices, because once you assign an app via this route, it shows up in the web portal. And because it's for non-enrolled devices, it's also accessible for any MDM enrolled devices as well. And we currently have this assignment type supported across a majority of the app types. Windows Store for Business support is still upcoming there. And another new type of assignment we've also added is user and device licensing. So if you'll remember, we talked about volume purchased apps for iOS VPP and Windows Store for Business. Now this is an additional parameter you can add to that assignment such that you can decide, how the app license gets deployed. So with that, I'll go ahead and demo how that assignment looks. Here we go. So here we're going to pick an iOS volume purchased app. And to access any of the assignment or deployment flows, you'll be going under the assignment section under Manage here. And you'll notice, this is where you select the groups to assign. I'll go ahead and select this one. And these are all the assignment types we just talked about. I'm going to go ahead and select Required here. And under License Type, you'll notice User and Device Licensing. So what this means in this case is when you select User Licensing and hit Save, that user is going to have one app license associated with them. And so all they have to do is log in with their Apple ID, and they'll be able to access that app across multiple devices. Now, I want to caveat here that there is a limit on the number of devices, and that is managed on the Apple side. Now, if you were to select device licensing, it would associate an app license with the device itself. So the user doesn't have to log in with their Apple ID. They can get direct access to the app on that device. So that's how the differentiation works between the two license types there. Now I'm going to show you the other new feature we released, and that's the available with or without enrollment assignment type. And that can also be accessed under assignments here. Go ahead and select a group. I've just opened up Microsoft Teams, which we just demoed as adding to our environment. And once again, go under type here, and you'll see all of the assignment types we just talked about. And here we have available with or without enrollment. The moment I click this and hit save, all it does is it makes this app available on the web portal for me. So really quick, I want to show you how this looks like on the client device. Because it takes some time to deploy, you'll see that this is the web portal, by the way, on this client iPad that I'm projecting from. And these are apps that I've already deployed. And you can click in and see all the details there. And these are all the details that you either fill out here or directly retrieved from the store. And with that, I'm handing it off to Joey to take it off with Protect and Configure.
Sure. So just one last note on that, deploying apps with or without enrollment. That's applicable for line of business apps as well as store apps. Store apps just kind of works like a deep link into the iOS or Google Play Store. Line of business apps will actually pull the app down directly from our web portal. And the user will have to go through a little bit of a clunky experience where they say that they have to trust the developer or something like that. But the distribution channel is there for both devices, as Pragathi said, that are MDM enrolled as well as unenrolled devices. OK, so let's talk about app config. I'll start in the MDM sense. So this isn't necessarily new news to anybody. Intune supports MDM-based app config. So these are platform controls supported on both iOS and now Android for work. Intune MDM supports it. It's an app config that's assigned alongside an app assignment. And it essentially allows the admin to define how the app should behave on an MDM managed device the first time it's launched. So you can set up, for instance, I know the Outlook team is working on setting up email profiles automatically using the app config channel. It's basically a provisioning package that's delivered through MDM. There are some issues to this approach, though. First, it's tied to a platform. So there's restrictions based on, again, if Android just came up for Android for work, but the native Android doesn't have this type of support. iOS has been out for a while, and Windows doesn't necessarily have this level of functionality. It requires MDM. So this is only for either your corp enrolled or your MDM enrolled devices. And it's, again, delivered through the MDM channel that all EMM providers can use. So what Intune did is it took this concept a step further and developed an app config that's part of our Intune SDK. So the Intune SDK, again, traditionally is the mechanism that we use to deliver policy, app protection policies, or MAM policies, without enrollment required whatsoever. So this is an SDK that's natively built into all of the Office apps on iOS and Android. We're working with third-party partners. The SDK is available to the public. So for your own apps, you can implement your app with this SDK. And what it allows you to do is it's combined with the ADAL, Azure Active Directory Authentication Library, to say that when a user logs in to any application, we basically Intune provisions a special token into AAD that says, in addition to being granted authentication, this is an SDK-enabled app. Wake up the SDK, go directly to Intune, and get all this stuff. So the first thing I'm talking about is configuration, but it also gets the app protection profiles. So no part of that process requires MDM at all. And because it's completely distinct from MDM, every app built with the Intune SDK works the same way on an Intune-enrolled device, on a non-enrolled device, or again, on a device enrolled to Mobile Iron or AirWatch. So it's entirely app-based, contained into an app. So app configuration doesn't require device enrollment, works across iOS and Android the same way. We're building something like this for Windows, and hopefully that'll come out sometime next year. So the impact here is that our partner applications that have adopted the SDK can now extend all the functionality that Intune provides. Essentially what we're saying is we're giving you a channel that an admin can create a bunch of key value pairs and do whatever you want to do with it. So a lot of the Office teams are already picking this up and running with it. OneDrive is building specific settings that are data protection settings actually for their OneDrive app, and it'll be delivered through this app config channel. Outlook, like I mentioned, is allowing, in the case that auto-discover doesn't work when a user logs in with AAD, they're building the ability to provision email profiles through Outlook. And then the app I wanted to focus on the most today is our managed browser, which has taken advantage of this capability. So just to take a step back, to reintroduce the managed browser for those of you that don't know, this is an application on iOS and Android that essentially works exactly like Safari, except that it's built natively with our Intune SDK. So what that means is we can apply data protection, and we can apply app configuration. So yeah, admin can control in the managed browser links that open from other Office apps. They can direct them into the managed browser, and once data is being accessed from the managed browser, you can block, copy, and paste to other apps. You can basically browse the web like Safari. But one thing the managed browser did to sort of bolster its capabilities recently, and if you guys attended the conditional access talk, you probably saw a quick demo of this, is it said, let's grab some of these app configs when a user is signed in and do some pre-provisioning. So the managed browser today, through the app config channel, supports the ability to define a URL allow or block list. So when the managed browser is active, you can define basically a list of URLs that a user shouldn't be able to access. You can pre-configure the managed browser's homepage. You can pre-configure the managed browser's bookmark list. So if you want to basically chain this ability to say, we want to put the Intune company portal into the managed browser bookmarks, then the user opens their email, gets a welcome email, goes into the managed browser, sees the company portal and the bookmarks, they click on that, then they can see all of their app catalog. So based on what Pragathi said earlier about how we can assign apps with or without enrollment, you can now pre-configure bookmarks to kind of point people in that direction. But the most interesting feature, in my opinion, that the managed browser supports out of the gates using app config is on-prem access to on-prem apps using AAD app proxy. So again, the managed browser is basically receiving a configuration that says, hey, go map all of our internal URLs according to what we've configured in AAD app proxy to the app proxy URLs. And only those URLs will be able to access through the managed browser. So what you could do is, this is kind of an architecture diagram of how that works. It's a little small up there, but you guys will get the slides afterwards. Basically, the app config tells people tells the managed browser to wake up, to go get policy, and to map all internal URLs to the app proxy. This could be combined, and I encourage you guys, if you didn't go to the conditional access session a few days ago, to check that session out. It could be combined with conditional access to say that the only browser that can access these Azure AD app proxy sites is the managed browser. So now all of your internal apps can only be accessed through this browser, and this browser can be protected with policy. So let me show you a quick demo of what this app configuration looks like. Thanks. OK, so this is my Intune console. If I go into Intune here, I go into mobile apps. Kathy showed you earlier. If I add an app configuration policy, I can go in here and click Add. And again, this is where app config exists for iOS and Android. And the first thing that you can do now is choose whether you're deploying this through the MDM channel or whether you're going to leverage the Intune SDK to build app config. So if you're saying this is enrolled with Intune, you pick which platform you want, and this is the MDM app config deployment. You can pick your app that you've added, and then go into configuration settings, import XML data, or use the configuration designer to create all the key value pairs. So this is all discoverable on a per app basis. Apps basically register which configurations they support through the MDM channel, and Intune supports that whole config. But as I talked about at the top, you can also deliver an app config through our SDK. So when Outlook supports the email profile, they'll basically release documentation, a blog post, or whatnot, and say, hey, go into Intune, use the Intune SDK, and make these key value pairs, and you'll have email profile configured for people. So with this, what we say is the first thing you do is you choose which app you want to associate with this app config policy. Every app on this list is an app that has either the Intune SDK that we know about that's already in the App Store, or it's an app that you added, like Pragathi demonstrated at the top, where we detect that the SDK exists. So if you take your line of business app and you build it with the Intune SDK, as soon as you add it into Intune, it'll show up in these lists if the SDK is detected as a presence there. So if I come in here and I look for Manage Browser on iOS, I can click OK, and I can create a set of configurations. I have already done that for a policy, so let's look at what those are. And so this is kind of the value. This is entirely up to each app. So the Manage Browser app said our name that you're going to configure is, so for instance, to set the app proxy redirection, you have to enter this. They publish this. And the value that you're going to configure there is true. And when that happens, we'll route all of your internal sites to your AAD app proxy sites. Same thing here. Here's a configuration that says managebrowser.bookmarks, and they tell you enter a pipe delimited set of bookmarks that should show up for all of your end users when they use the managed browser. In the future, Intune is going to basically register all of these app configs that we know about. So anyone that Office registers the managed browser, and we'll have some friendly UI here. So when you choose managed browser, you'll actually see controls like you do with the rest of the settings that just let you configure it without kind of going in and manually doing that. We plan to support that in the next few months. So I've already configured this, and I've turned the app proxy on. I've listed a set of bookmarks, and I have assigned this to my demo group. So if I jump back into the iPad, cast this to you. So what I have here is a combination of, this is an unenrolled device, so this could be a device that I just went out and bought. And all I've done as the end user is I've downloaded Outlook and signed in, and I've downloaded the managed browser because I tried to open a link in Outlook once, and it said you have to use the managed browser to open these links. Those are app protection policies, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. But let's go through that scenario. So I've signed into Outlook. And the first thing you'll see is one factor of the app protection policy. So this is a pin prompt in the app. So this has nothing to do with MDM. This is because the app's built with the Intune SDK, and my admin has created an app protection policy that says when Joey signs into Outlook, make sure he enters a pin. So I enter my super secure 111 pin, and somebody sent me an email and it says, hey, book your travel here. And this is a URL to an internal travel site. So when I click on this, another part of the app protection policy my admin set up is it said all links should redirect to the managed browser. Again, if I copied this link or I manually typed it into Safari, you can create a conditional access policy that says no browser can open this besides the managed browser. So redirecting you from this app is just a nice user experience method that we've built. So Chris sent me a link that said, hey, book your travel here, and this is just some internal site. So when I click on it, the first thing you see is I've bounced to the managed browser, and at the top you can see that it's authenticating me because I have the AAD auth app, and it's put me to the MS App Proxy app. So I've registered this app in my ecosystem. This is my internal travel site, and I'm redirected here. So now I have an email that is a site that I'd never be able to get to on an iPad outside the corporate network. I'm just over the demo Wi-Fi right now, and we've routed ourselves here. All of this is possible via the app config that I talked about with the managed browser that we configured. OK, so let's move on to the next phase, which is protect apps. So I touched on this where you saw the pin prompt in Outlook. All of this uses the same Intune SDK that's available. Works, again, the same on MDM and non-enrolled devices. And we really consider app protection to be two parts. One is the policies that enforce a pin, block copy paste between a managed app and a non-managed app. And the second part is app-based CA, which I'll talk about in a few slides. But I just want to touch on the app protection policy has existed for about 2.5 years now. We have 19 SDK-enabled apps, primarily Office on iOS. All of this is exclusive to Intune, so mobile and AirWatch, they can't use the Intune SDK without an EMS license. There's 16 SDK-enabled apps on Android, again, primarily Office, all exclusive to Intune. And as I've said a few times, this SDK doesn't matter what MDM you're using. So right away, we had Nestle as a customer that we worked very closely with. They had a requirement that said we don't want to MDM enroll our devices, or we have a third-party MDM. We kind of have this mix. And we want our OneDrive app to be protected with a PIN. It was as simple as that. This was at the very early stages. We actually worked very closely with them to build out this, what we call MAM without enrollment, or MAM-WE feature set. And they were able to adopt this quickly and roll this out to about 250,000 users over the course of a couple months. They did a quick pilot and evaluation, saw that it worked, and deployed the whole thing across all their users. So it's a super easy solution to deploy. It's something that's just a cloud configuration. There's no special certs or anything that need to be required or added. You're just configuring which apps and what protections should be in place. And as the end user, I can just go to the App Store and get Outlook, or I can go to the company portal and get it. Distribution doesn't matter. It's seamless as the end user. I sign in, and I get a PIN prompt. It's as simple as that. So let's talk about, we talked about app protection policies. That's great and all if I do happen to go to the App Store and download Outlook and use that for my email. But what if I just go and get some other email app that uses some other authentication, and I get email there, and it doesn't have the SDK? For that reason, AAD has built app-based CA. So basically, across O365 services, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, you can restrict those services to only Intune-protected apps, only the apps that have the Intune SDK. And that's available through AAD in this setting here. And essentially, all that says is it's basically an allow list of apps for a service principal. So if I try to log in with the native iOS email app, which has no Intune SDK, or some other third-party app, I'll get blocked access at the service layer. And only Intune SDK-enabled apps will be allowed. So that managed browser scenario that I talked about, that's kind of built through this. This conditional access at the app level combines well with conditional access at the MDM level. You can actually apply an and or an or operation across the two. So basically what that means is I could set up app-based conditional access and require that the user uses Outlook to download their email, and also require that the device is MDM enrolled. I could do both of those things. So then I both have an MDM managed device and they're using an app that's protected. Or I can do an or. I can say, you can either go to the App Store and download Outlook, and you don't have to enroll your device and give up all of those privacy concerns about enrolling a device. Or if you want to use the iOS native mail app or some other app, go ahead and use it, but then you're going to have to use conditional access to enroll your device. So you can use Outlook, and your experience is going to be great, or you can use another email app if you're familiar with it, but then you're going to have to go and enroll so we can protect your data. So all of this is possible with app and device-based CA. So the big feature that I wanted to talk about today is Windows 10 support. So for a long time, all of our MAM controls were really focused around iOS and Android. But as of the Creators Update, Windows 10 uses a technology called Windows Information Protection. And I know there's been some sessions on that maybe I had a chance to attend. But it essentially gives the same app protection controls that we have on iOS and Android. And it's built natively into the operating system. So whereas we need to use the Intune SDK on OS platforms that don't cooperate nicely with us, we work directly with Windows every step of the way to set Windows Information Protection directly in the OS. So this is a feature set that does encryption, blocks data leakage. It basically protects, again, a list of apps from corporate resources and makes sure that data is either locked down or encrypted in the file system. This technology exists both with and without enrollment as well. So on an MDM enrolled device, you can create a Windows Information Protection policy and push it down like any other device policy. But on a non-enrolled device, Intune has permission to basically set the bit when a work account is added on the device. So not MDM enrolling or workplace joining or anything like that, just adding a work account. Intune can go and set these protection controls in the OS. And essentially what we do is we say, here's a list of apps. Here's the protection controls they need to adhere to. And the OS will recognize when an app is running and apply that control. So I'll show you what that looks like. Quick demo. So we're back here in Intune. And in the same place that I configure app protection policies on iOS and Android, I can configure them on Windows. So if I add a policy, there's just a third platform here, and it's Windows 10. With Windows 10, I could choose whether this policy should be applied on an MDM enrolled device or a non-enrolled device. If it's an MDM enrolled device, there's no special prerequisites. I go in, I do all the rest of the steps, and I deploy the thing like any other device policy. On a non-enrolled device, I actually do have to do one step. I have to go into AAD, and I have to configure a set of URLs to basically say when a user adds a work account, go to these URLs that goes and applies MAM policy. So that redirect didn't work. I think it's because of my tenant. But basically, that link there on any other tenant is going to take you into AAD, where you can configure a set of URLs and target those URLs to users. Again, what that means is when those users then add a work account, the Windows client will go and look at the URL you configured. They're pre-populated with Intune by default. And go and retrieve MAM policy instead of kicking off an auto-enrollment to MDM. So if you want to do the without enrollment functionality with Windows, you can configure that there. It's a really quick prerequisite step. And once that's complete, you can come in and choose your list of apps you want to protect. So this, if you're familiar with iOS and Android experience, is just like iOS and Android. We allow you to add apps. We have a set of recommended apps. All of these apps we know work well with the Windows Information Protection technology. They're embedded with code that does the encryption. Windows calls it the Enlightenment SDK. It's something on Windows' end, but we have a list of apps that are basically recommended and tested with this. You'll notice that in this app list, much like we have a managed browser on iOS and Android, Windows version of the managed browser is Microsoft Edge and IE 11. So Edge and IE 11 are both compliant with Windows Information Protection. They both work well. And actually, in MSIT, we have this policy applied to us today on Edge. So what you could do is you could say, if my scenario is I just want to protect Office apps and other apps that are built into the OS, like Notepad, that are WIP aware, I can hit these checkboxes and move on. You'll notice that these are both store apps and desktop apps, and the O365 Pro Plus suite, as of its 1708, which is its August release, is all in this recommended list. So the O365 Pro Plus, I don't remember the official marketing definition they had, but their August release supports WIP. So okay, so I can click OK. That'll add all of these apps to my app list for this policy. I additionally can go and add more apps to this list. So I can add other store apps, and I can go find this information from the store. Or I can add signed desktop apps that are signed using what's called AppLocker XML. So I can add something like Chrome or Firefox to a WIP policy, or I can add just some line of business. Any MSI, EXE, even DLLs can all be applicable to be added through our technology. And basically what that means is those apps are added to the list, and because they aren't WIP aware, they maybe don't have an add work account experience, the OS will just sit there and run and detect when one of these apps is open and running, and if it is, it'll apply controls across the entire app. Basically works like an app wrapper. So there's no context between a work account and a personal account like some of the other WIP-enabled apps have, like Office, but you can still protect those apps in your organization. Okay, so I've added my app list. I'm going to skip over the concept of exempt apps for now. That kind of there's kind of some corner cases where you may want to exempt certain apps from policy. Basically, these apps will still have access to resources, but they don't have to adhere to any sort of WIP protection. It's not a necessary configuration. But then all I have to do, the only settings that are required for WIP to work, so unlike iOS and Android, where we have 100 different settings that you can block copy paste, you can block data transfer, you can decide what encryption level, WIP just has one bundled setting in one switch. And actually, there's a couple different flavors. So you can say, I don't want to protect data leakage at all. I want to silently protect data leakage, which means people can leak data from Office to some other app, but every time they do, an audit log is created. And technologies like like Intune and OMS can pick up all of this information and expose it to the admin and say that, hey, these users are leaking data on these apps X, Y, and Z frequently. You may want to go and protect those apps. Similarly, you can turn on an override prompt. So this is what MSIT has actually turned on internally for Microsoft employees. Essentially what this says is, yeah, you can leak data, but we're going to give you a prompt. The OS will flash a prompt that says, hey, this data is corporate information, and this app that you're trying to paste to is not. Are you sure you want to do it? If they override it, the same audit log will be picked up by OMS, Intune, and all of it's captured. And then this semi-confusing title called hide overrides basically acts as a block. So what this says is you can't copy, paste, or leak data in any way from a protected app to a non-protected app. Corporate identity, this essentially is the identity that EFS encrypts as a key. So we'll pre-populate that with your tenant ID. Again, it's not something you even have to worry about configuring. So if your goal was to protect Office apps, so far, all you've had to do is hit some checkboxes and turn this knob to whatever you want it to turn to. And that's it. Office 365 resources will be protected with WIP, and the Office apps in the recommended list will already be configured. Additionally, there's a ton of advanced settings here where you can add an additional network perimeter to your policy. So you can say, you know what, we also use these IP ranges, and we want those to be deemed as corporate data. If you add that to a WIP policy, then the OS will say when all of your apps from your list are accessing that set of network information, they should be corporate. If they're accessing any other network information, it's personal. And there's a ton of other settings here. One that I really wanted to touch on is using Azure RMS. So this is Azure Information Protection, which uses RMS technology, in place of EFS encryption. So if you turn this on, you can apply a Azure Information Protection template ID. And when you do that, all data that's saved with a WIP-protected app will be protected and encrypted to that RMS template. So now you have data sharing capabilities chained together with a WIP policy. So when you create this, you can assign it just like any other policy or any app that Pragathi talked about at the top. And I want to just give you a quick demo of what WIP looks like. So again, MSIT is using this today. This is the deck that we're presenting right now that Pragathi and I saved in SharePoint. That's what we use to collaborate. First thing I'll notice, if I go into File here, the Office app is protected, and it deems it as such. It says this is a work protected app, and it's going to be encrypted to corp.microsoft.com. And if I take some of this data, and I copy it, and I try to use a personal app, so I'm going to say WordPad is a personal app. If I paste that data here, I get a prompt that says, hey, this is our override prompt. Hey, this app is asking for access, and your IT admin is going to log that you did this. Again, you can configure this to say, no, don't even do override, just block that paste action. So if I say yes, an audit log was created, and I'm able to paste data. Furthermore, if I save this document locally, and if I open up my documents folder, you can see this is my actual work documents folder. There are a ton of documents here that are protected that I downloaded from SharePoint and saved locally. So here's a customer meeting that I had to attend with Brad. And if I try to open this document with something that's not WIP enabled, so not Word or anything like that, the first thing I could see when I'm opening is Windows, again, because this information protection is built into the OS, it tells me which apps can access work and personal files and which can't. So Word can, IE can, Notepad actually can, and Paint, but WordPad can't. It's not protected with this policy, and it only opens personal files. So I say, I do want to use WordPad, and I click OK. WordPad actually blocks me. The OS says, sorry, this file can't get access. This app isn't protected with WIP. And you'll notice that I have other documents. This is my wedding rehearsal invitation that isn't protected at all because I saved this in my own OneDrive personal folder, and it has no file ownership attributed to it. So that was kind of a long-winded demo, but I really wanted to show how configuring a MAM policy for Windows 10 can be as easy in the Office and Office 365 scenario as configuring it on iOS and Android. But it's a much more robust and powerful piece of technology. It's built into the OS. Again, all of this is seamlessly, there's no SDK, there's no sort of tie to an app experience. This is built into the OS itself as of the creator's update. Okay, so I'll pass it back off for the end of our talk with Pragati.
So at this point, we've reached the last stage of the app lifecycle. We've covered 4 steps so far. We've covered how to add an app, how to assign or deploy an app, how to configure, and how to protect an app as well. So at this point, you've probably decided that an app is no longer relevant to your company or that it is obsolete. And there are a few options here. And in this case, we actually diverge a little bit when it comes to MDM-enrolled corporate devices versus BYOD non-enrolled devices. So in the case of MDM-enrolled devices, we have a couple options. You have the device wipe, which is the most heavy-handed step you can take in Retire. What it does is you can go to a specific device and choose whether you want to factory reset or remove company data. And this removes all company data as well as the apps installed on the device. So like I said, this is pretty heavy-handed and it's pretty much optional. It depends on how thorough you want to be. The next step you can take is to assign an app as uninstalled. So if you'll recall, we talked about app assignment earlier and uninstall being one of them. You can go ahead and make sure that app is no longer in use in your corporate environment, in your organization. And this is the main way to do that. So once you deploy it, you can then check to make sure whether devices still have it installed. And that's the third step here. You can monitor to check for uninstallation. And finally, once you're satisfied with the state of the app in your organization, you can go ahead and delete the app, and then Intune is no longer aware of it and can't manage it after that. So to just show you a few examples, this is what device wipe looks like today. You'll have to navigate to a device here, and up top, those are the 2 commands available for you to take that wipe action. And next up, let's say you were to deploy a mobile app as uninstall. You can go under the device install status here under the monitor section of the left. So in this case, we're in the classroom app blade, and we've navigated under monitor to check which devices actually have this app. So here, you'll see the number of devices reducing as apps uninstall. And finally, we have the delete app stage where, if you'll remember in the earlier managed app list, you'll just go ahead and click on the context menu on the right and hit delete. So finally, as I'd mentioned before, there are some slightly different steps you'll have to take for BYOD or non-enrolled devices. And I do want to call out here that these steps are also available for MDM-enrolled devices as well. The first step you take here is app selective wipe. So all this does is you select users that you want to issue a wipe for and corresponding apps that you want to remove company data for. And once you do that, it will go ahead and remove any corporate information. And you can also monitor the wipes that you have issued this way. So this is a screenshot of what that looks like today. You can go ahead and hit the command up top there to issue a new wipe request, and you'll get the blade where you select users as well as apps there. And once you've selected that, you'll see this report populate saying whether the wipe is pending, whether it's gone through, and if it was successful. And it lists that out at a per app level so you're aware that the users are no longer using that app in a corporate context. So with that, I'd like to recap all the steps we covered today. We covered add, deploy, configure, protect, and retire. And in each of these stages, we covered a few new features. So to quickly recap on that as well, in add, we covered the Office 365 Pro Plus suite, which we've recently added support for. In deploy, we covered the user device licensing for volume purchased apps, and we covered the BYOD deployment scenario. Under configure, we looked into BYOD app configuration, as well as how to set up an app proxy with a managed browser. And of course, under app protection, we covered Windows 10 app protection scenarios. And finally, for retire, we covered all the basics on what's available in console today. So with that, I'd like to hand off to Joey for final conclusions.
Yeah, so that's basically everything we have. You've probably seen this if you've attended Intune slides, but just wanted to give you a reminder that Fast Track is available. It actually was key in the beginning of the MAM-WE functionality for us. We partnered with them early, when 2.5 years ago when we built the technology, and we saw customers from 200 seats all the way up to 10,000 seats get deployed quickly with technology. It turned requirements back around to us fast as well. If we found bugs, we were able to discover them through the Fast Track team quickly. It was a really good experience. So there's a lot of momentum to that, 40,000 customers enabled, something to look into. For those watching at home or who are downloading the deck, there is training on everything that we talked about, specifically with Office apps, available with LinkedIn Learning. And it's at the link here. For downloading the deck, you can go ahead and click that. Give people a minute to take a picture. But it really goes even farther in depth as to how this stuff can be configured. And that's it. That's everything we have. So there's only a few seconds left. I don't know if we'll have a ton of time for questions. I apologize for that. Fit a lot in 45 minutes. But Pragathi and I will be around, both up here until they kick us out, as well as around out there if you guys have questions. Thank you.
Thank you.